California, Barbara Lee.
Thank you, and I want to thank the gentleman for calling the special order tonight and for your leadership. Today marks the 4th anniversary of the invasion and bombing of Iraq. It is a solemn occasion that reminds me, with a very heavy heart, of our brave troops who we want to protect and who we want to bring home. As the occupation now enters its 5th year, it's really an appropriate time to review some of the history. It's also an appropriate time to recall that the case for this war was false. All the talks about aluminum tubes and yellow cake, remember that? Right. Colin Powell's dramatic presentation to the United Nations. I still wonder why such a distinguished Secretary of State would do that. The fact is, there was no connection between Al-Qaeda. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And there was no connection between the horrific events of 9/11 and Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Some of us opposed the war from the beginning. In fact, if my amendment to the authorization to use force had passed 4 years ago, the United Nations inspectors would have had the opportunity to finish their job and confirm what we believed, and some of us knew at that time, and what the world now knows, namely that Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction. It is an appropriate time now to review the disaster that has taken place in Iraq so that the administration does not rewrite this tragic history, and also to put the administration on notice and in check from starting a preemptive war against Iran, which many see as looming. It's appropriate tonight to review this history because the administration who brought us this debacle would now like us to accept an open-ended commitment to it. Why is it appropriate for us to remind the country of all of this tonight? Because the same people, the same administration who brought us this disaster are now asking us to trust them again. They are saying that we should give the president another chance. They are saying, in effect, that our commitment to supporting their failed policies should be open-ended. Think about that for a minute. The people in this administration who have been wrong about every single major decision about this war are now trying to make it seem unreasonable to suggest that we should not continue to write blank checks to support this debacle. Well, it is not unreasonable. That is where the American people are on this issue. They know better. It is time for this unfortunate chapter of our history to close. It is time to end the occupation of Iraq and bring our troops home. At various points, the administration has told us that the mission has been accomplished, that we were turning the corner, or that the insurgency was in its last throes. As we now know, those pronouncements were all false. The truth is that the administration's conduct of this war has been nothing short of shameful. We may never know how many of the roadside bombs that kill our troops every day are made from explosives looted from weapons depots that were left unguarded because the administration chose to ignore the advice of our military commanders on how many troops would be needed. Whatever the number is, it is too many. It is an appropriate time tonight to review the cost of the administration's failed policy in Iraq. The human cost of this occupation has been terrible. More than 3,200 United States servicemen and women have died, and more than 32,000 have been wounded. That's an average of 67 deaths and 500 wounded every month. Not to mention the death and injuries of countless Iraqis. The financial cost is unsustainable. Already, we have spent more than $400 billion on this invasion and occupation. We are averaging more than $8 billion per month. That is staggering. The cost of our security has been devastating. The Bush administration's military and foreign policy doctrine of preemptive war, like you can start a war based on perceived future threats, this was supposed to solve the problem posed by the so-called axis of evil. 4 years after putting the doctrine to test in Iraq, the results are in, and it is a total failure. Iraq posed no imminent threat to our security. But today, the vast majority of our security resources are bogged down in Iraq. North Korea has obtained nuclear weapons, something the doctrine was to prevent, and Iran is empowered and emboldened. The occupation is undermining our efforts to fight international terrorism. According to the National Intelligence Estimates of April 2006, and this is in their words, they said, the Iraq conflict has been the cause célèbre for jihadists, breeding a deep resentment of United States involvement in the Muslim world and cultivating supporters for the global jihadist movement. Now, this is what the National Intelligence Estimates said. Furthermore, the toll that the occupation is taking on our armed forces is stretching our military beyond the breaking point. The Washington Post reported today that Army and Marine officials are referring to a readiness death spiral in which the ever more rapid pace of war zone rotations has consumed 40% of the total gear, wearied troops, and left no time to train to fight anything other than insurgents now at hand. The administration likes to talk about the situation in Iraq in terms of winning and losing because it is convenient to portray critics of their policies as opposed to victory or supportive of defeat. The fact is, you cannot win an occupation just as there is no way for the United States to win an Iraqi civil war. The Bush administration understands this, just as they understand that there are no pretty or clean options for bringing a responsible end to our policy there. They are content to mouth the words of victory while they try to run out the clock, playing a cynical game of political chicken, where whoever acts to bring a responsible end to their failed policy will be accused of having lost Iraq. The trouble is, though, that an average of 67 troops die in Iraq each month and 500 are wounded, and we can't forget that. As General Petraeus and the Iraq Study Group both pointed out, there is no military solution to this civil war and occupation. For me, the cost of going along with the president's escalation charade and risking our brave young men and women's lives is way too high. It's time to bring this war and occupation to an end. It's time for military measures to be replaced with diplomacy and engagement with Iraq's neighbors. It's time to take the targets off our troops' back and to bring them home. Thank you, Mr. Henchy, for this special order tonight. And let's hope that the American people raise their voices loudly and clearly with regard to what is taking place with this war and bring it to an end very soon.
Well, I thank you very much for your very articulate expression of all of those facts, your leadership here, and for joining us this evening.